Martin Sorrell, good to have you back
Good
on
to be
CNBC
back.
TV 18.
Delighted to be
So
here.
the report suggests that you're here to boost India's self-confidence.
No. I was here to kick the tires. It was just that everybody seemed to need a boost when I was here, actually. But I come and all the clouds are dispelled, and currently England are 146 for 2. So what's wrong with that?
But really, how much of a problem do you think the kind of negative sentiment that prevails in India affects business, and how does it affect your business? Because it's a reflection of business sentiment, isn't it?
When we look at India, it's sort of interesting. Our business here is about $500 million. We won't quite get to a $500 million of revenue here with 12,000 people here by the end of this year, but next year we'll definitely be over 500 million. And if I look at this year, we're up about 10%. Organic growth, excluding acquisitions and the impact of currency, which has now become significant in the context of India. And if I look at the preliminary budgets, haven't been through them, we're going to spend the next glorious 2 or 3 weeks in New York going through them. But if I look at next year and look at what my colleagues have said whilst I've been here in India for 4 or 5 days, they're forecasting a similar level for next year, actually, before we've gone through it. And they may be being a bit conservative. They tend to be a bit conservative. So look, despite the gloom, and despite this lack of self-confidence that I detect here, particularly in the upper echelons of business here in India, despite that, the Indian economy still functions. It's still growing at 5%. I mean, we give our, and the projections for next year are 5%, and we give our eye teeth. Our left and right arms in the UK, we can't get to a half or 1%.
I get that, but I think when you compare the fact that the size of the Indian economy, and when you look at what 5% is compared to the real growth that would result from a 5% growth, and in real terms what you got with a 9% growth, that's when the problem arises. Isn't it?
except it's all about relatives, and Brazil, I pointed this out a couple of days, has surpassed Britain, not only in terms of playing football, but also in terms of GDP. So Brazil is the 6th largest economy in the world. It's bigger than the UK. Now, somebody said, well, if India continues to grow at 5, we're growing at 10, so twice the GDP rate. If India continues to grow at 5 and Britain continues to grow at half, India will be in the same position as Brazil shortly. So these things are about relative growth. And what's happened in the world, certainly in our experience, is that the absolute growth rates have gone down, but the relative difference between India, for example, and the UK, or India and the US, has remained the same. So that's why I find the lack of self-confidence. Obviously, there are political issues. You've got an election coming up that causes uncertainty. There are tensions clearly between the Congress Party and the BJP and everything. It's a very difficult situation. There's clearly big issues as far as corruption is concerned. There are big issues as far as regulation are concerned. Measures that people say are going to be put in place, like retail, and then they get blocked. You and I were discussing a few minutes ago about bills that are sitting in Parliament undealt with. So this causes tremendous uncertainty and I think anxiety. But longer term, what's driving the Indian economy is the rise of the middle class and the lower middle class. That's what drives it in Brazil and Russia and China too.
In this prevailing 5% growth scenario, given the way your business is doing in India, given that it's
fine,
inching close to $500 million, given that China is $1 billion, how soon before India closes in onto the billion mark for WPP at this growth rate? How many years?
And this is the dangerous thing to say, because hopefully we'll be having another conversation in 5 or 6 years. I would give it. We could compound at somewhere between 10 to 15%. Let's say this year, a lot of people would say it has been an average year. I think it's been a pretty good year for us. It would be 10%. A good year might be 15. If I was being a little bit more expansive, if England were 350 for 2, maybe I'd be even better, more optimistic. But I think one could say 10 to 15. So then you're talking about 6 years. 6 to 7 years as being the target. Now it's very dangerous to say that because things like that have a habit of coming.
Feel a lot of pressure, isn't it?
biting you in the backside when you do that. But acquisitions cannot give us the growth in a market like India. If we're growing at 10%, that means organic is $50 million. You can't find acquisitions. You might be lucky if you find an acquisition of $12 million or $10 million or 5, but. No, it's interesting that none of our competition, when they announce an acquisition here, ever give any detail. None, zero.
So, in your usual combative style, you've preempted my question.
Combative what?
And that is that the two big, the acquisitions, WPP, and you've been making statements that the recent acquisitions we've seen in the Indian advertising industry, Omnicom
ridiculous.
Taking control at Mudra,
Ridiculous.
And then Dentsu and Taproot. You say ridiculous.
It just goes to show what a Wharton MBA can do. I mean, Wharton MBAs extract.
So why should we believe
very strong prices from very aggressive people who want to catch up.
But so much.
Johnny come latelys who
So you're saying they're desperate. You're saying that these acquisitions have been
done out of desperation.
Have been done out of desperation.
Absolutely.
This is not a case of the grapes are sour.
No.
Not at all.
No, done out of desperation. I mean, they are economically unjustifiable in terms of
So
returns.
you know exactly how much they paid for them?
Absolutely. We were told by the vendors how much they were paid. I mean, the vendors were trying to jack up the prices. No, we know exactly. And it just can't work. It just economically can't work.
When you look at what Mudra would have offered WPP, what Taproot, a small, tiny agency, but really working and doing some of the most talked about campaigns for brands that are actually on your agency's rosters.
Will not last. You heard it first here.
You're saying it on the record.
Totally, of course. Well, of course, I'm surrounded by 25 people here.
All right. So you don't think that you missed out on these in the context of these acquisitions?
No, listen. I would like I'd like for us to grow organically and by acquisition. Organic growth, funny coming from me, but organic growth is always stronger. But to be very blunt on it, the prices that Dentsu, for example, and not so much, Anil Ambani is an accomplished deal maker. There's a list of people that you should have of people you don't do deals with because they're smarter than you. He would be on that list. But in the case of Dentsu, it's desperation because of the lack of growth in the Japanese market, which continues to go back. We've had this, and it's a. So
you're putting their Aegis acquisition in that same in the same boat.
Absolutely, they paid a 48% premium. If you go back and look at the history of Premier in the UK for public company acquisitions over the last 10 to 15 years, it ranges from 30 at the lowest to 50 at the highest. They paid the top price. And there was no reason for them to do it because there was no other bidder. Zero.
So there have been reports in papers like the Economic Times that
usually unsubstantiated reports with zero sources,
which you have denied, and which Sam Balsara has denied as well, about Dentsu and WPP actually lining up to buy the last big agency.
I can't speak for Dentsu.
Last big Indian agency.
No, but I can talk for ourselves. We have no negotiations with Sam. You know that we have a joint company. Mediacom. And so Mediacom works with Sam, and that's been very successful and grows very well, and we're delighted with it. And Sam is a great partner for
But you'd like it if you could buy it at the right price, of course.
If something like Madison, without being specific about Madison, something like that was available at the right, I think what you say is the right price. You see, what Dentsu has done and what Omnicom have done in the market is raised people's expectations to unrealistic levels. So it builds in, and we've seen this in Brazil, it alters people's view. It's the internet market in the US is also the third area where there are three areas: Brazil, India, and internet in the US, which in our view are excessively priced. That doesn't mean if you don't work hard that you can't find things. But what the difficulty for us is, and the problem with earnouts in particular, is you buy your own goodwill. If there is any synergy between the company that comes into the group and your group, what you end up increasing the profits of the company that you're buying and paying a multiple on that increase. So every time you do something positive, you pay them up. So there is a limit to what you can do economically. That's why I say economically it's unviable. Quite apart from how people run their company, how you run your group, whether there's a melding of the cultures and a clash of the cultures. Now, do we make mistakes in acquisition areas? Sure we do. Not everything that we've done has been, stunningly successful. I wish it was. So it's a very difficult area. The other thing is that what's happening in the BRICS and the next 11 is a desperate game of catch up. It sounds arrogant to say it, but we do have a very strong position in all the BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, we have very strong market shares. Our competition, because they see the growth, for the reason that we were talking about the delta, right? Because they see the growth, want to jump in.
Are you saying that WPP is not going to look for acquisitions in an overheated market?
We will,
which is what you're implying currently?
By and large, we won't be priced up. What we will do, and you know, we've done, I lose count myself, we've done about 40 or 50 things in the first 10, 11 months of this year. It's centerpiece to our strategy. So all our acquisitions, bar one or two where we're trying to reinforce a client or develop a client position, all our acquisitions are in those three sweet spots. And India fills all of those areas. I mean, we can find things in India at the right price that, you know, obviously new market, digital, that have to do with technology and have to do with data.
On December 14th, we'll know whether you're still WPP and some of the WPP subsidiaries are still party to that case, right? That NDTV has filed.
We'll see what the judge thinks.
We'll see what the judge thinks. But in the meantime, I want to know, are you considering taking that statement that WPP made about wanting to sue NDTV for defamation? Was that a serious statement?
Absolutely. Matters always of that nature are always under consideration.
So, Martin Sorrell, you're a very combative man, as we
I'm
know,
not combative.
and we've established over the years on CNBC TV 18 in our many conversations. But I'm
not combative. All I'm saying,
you took that to an extreme in this case.
I didn't.
Can I quote something that you told us on CNBC TV 18?
Before you quote. I'm not extreme about this. You know, if somebody attacks us in terms of our practices or the way we go about things, if somebody attacks our people and suggests that our people do things, I defend them. Certainly, if I think we've always done the correct thing, I always defend them. I wouldn't describe it. It's rather unfair to call it combative or of the like. All I'm doing is defending what I think our people did and the way we went about things.
So let's say reputationally, how much has this affected TAM, which is a joint venture between Nielsen and Kantar, which is WPP owned?
You make general comment. Media owners get, in the television audience measurement business, always get concerned about their share. CNBC will be concerned about their share. And they get concerned if their shares fall. I mean, I'm not at all referring to their stock market shares, although in the case
You're talking about TV ratings.
And their
market share.
In the case of NDTV, the shares have fallen from about 500 rupees, I think, to 75 currently. And if that had happened to WPP, I would be extremely worried about it too. But I wouldn't use that, perhaps, as an excuse or a motivation to start talking about market share. It's interesting that NDTV in some of their campaigns and publicity have actually used data from TAM, to show that they have a number one position or whatever it is. So I think we have to be extremely careful. I think from what I have heard, there are people inside NDTV that even admit that the reason that they went to the New York case, the New York courts, the case was to establish some sort of media frenzy, which they were successful in doing, at least initially, until we spoke out in response.
Which is what you're saying, so I'll have to just leave it there. But the question that I need to put to you is that what has happened in the interim is that there have been broadcasters at different points of time with problems or issues with TAM that they seek to address in different ways over the 14 years that TAM has been in this country. Having said that, what this has done is got them to articulate their problems, and TAM has been on the back foot, confidence building measures, and all of that is going on.
No, I think that's a little bit unfair. I mean, TAM always, whether it's TAM here or in any other country, always seeks to make what it does better. I mean, it wouldn't be successful at doing what it's doing unless it sought to do that. So everything, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about India or anywhere else in the world for that matter. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about Nielsen or about Kantar or media research or whatever it has to be. You always, if you're in business for the long run, which we are, we always try to seek to make it better. And there will always be...
but Sir Martin, what has happened with this incident is that the attempts of the advertisers, the Broadcasters Foundation and the Advertising Agencies Association of India is that these three bodies have come together to form the Broadcast Audience Research Council,
fine.
and that's become...
but if that result... hold on a second. If that results in a better service, fine. That's what we're in business for, is to provide the best we possibly can do.
But from being
given certain economics. No, it's fine. Absolutely. If improvements can be made, they will be made.
You are aware that there may be a scenario where TAM, from being a single or monopolistic, depending on what word you would prefer, service provider in the rating business may become a vendor.
You can't get away with that, right? It's not monopolistic, right? People are free to
single, I said single.
No, but that's not, you use the word monopolistic. People are free to come into the market in any way possible. That's totally free to do that. It can happen in any market.
True.
It's a free market system, not a monopolistic system, which you're talking about.
You're aware that in the future, TAM could become a vendor to BARC and not a single service provider that operates on its own parameters.
No, that is always the possibility. So it's always been the case. There is no way that it cannot be the case. It'll always be the case. The situation hasn't changed.
Okay.
It'll always be the case.
The government and Prasar Bharati, which runs the state-owned broadcasters in the country, has also said that it's going to now ask the Competition Commission of India to look at TAM's, the way TAM works. Is that a cause for concern?
Because we're totally transparent in terms of the way it operates, and that's fine. We'll answer all questions, inquiries, queries, no problem at all.
Okay. Given that WPP is a communications company, would you, in retrospect, given that you thought that this NDTV was fighting this in the media, you referred to a media frenzy that happened, do you think that you had the best PR advice in the way WPP handled this issue in India?
No, I think it was absolutely the right thing to do. I think, in terms of the suit was filed, you and others picked it up. What are you suggesting? We just sit there and ignore it? Are you suggesting we sit there and let our people be accused of malpractice? Are you?
No, I'm not.
Okay, well then that was the right response. As I said to you before, that if somebody accuses our people of not doing the right thing, after due and careful inquiry, if we find that they do the right thing, if they've done the wrong thing, obviously, we'll deal with it. But if they do the right thing, I think it's our responsibility to stand up and be counted. I think if you don't do that, the potential damage is far greater, if you really think about it.
Final question. You mentioned shareholders.
Sure.
Trouble last year, trouble again this year.
What trouble
the
again
remuneration,
Wait a minute.
Sir Martin
Trouble
Sorrell.
last year, no. Trouble this year in relation to, on a non-binding vote.
I get that. But my question to you is that I've heard what you've said often enough. You've said it to me on this show several times, that you need to have for companies like WPP to see the kind of success WPP has, the scale it is today as a British company, you need to remunerate its top executives like the best in the world. You've said things to this effect.
No, I haven't said that.
Okay, what did you say?
I haven't said. It's going to take a long time, so I hope you'll be patient. What I've always said is there are two fundamental principles. I mean, apart from my own particular position, which is for 28 years having invested in the company, not being given options, which I sell and reload is the phrase, right? So I don't play ducks and drakes with the stock.
Yeah.
I've consistently over 28 years invested actually cash as well, right? Paid tax on stock, which I rolled over, so effectively putting more cash into the business, and built a stake which is worth, certainly in my terms, maybe not in other people's terms, in my terms quite considerable, and where most of my net worth is. Hence I wrote the article in the Financial Times, I'm an owner, not the owner, important distinction, an owner, and I act like one, which I thought was always the important element of compensation, that you should make managers inside businesses feel like owners, right? They're critically important. So that's the background.
Yeah.
The two important things were that firstly, we should be competitive, which I think is part of the point of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And the second thing, which was equally important, was consistency. So if, for example, proxy services like ISS, when they evaluate the proxy of Omnicom, ignore the fact that they have an 83-year-old chairman who used to be the CEO of the company, ignore the fact that the average age of the directors is 60 years, and that the average length of service of the directors is 14 years, but then apply a totally different standard to WPP by virtue of the fact that it's located in London or Dublin, as opposed to New York. That strikes me as being
Sir Martin,
inconsistent.
your arguments are well made, they're well taken, and this is what you've been saying consistently. My question to you...
Consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds.
Where does this go from here? Because this seems to be something that comes up and, you know, you're dealing with it.
Well,
and at the end of the day, it's a perception battle.
First of all, you know, it's not something that I decide. There is a board of directors, actually about, 16 people.
How are they going to address this going forward?
For a second, can I finish for a second? 16 directors, there's a compensation committee, there's a process. The answer to your question about how they deal with it is they talk to the shareholders, and they are talking to the shareholders currently, about what is the best structure for the sort of things that we're talking about, and they'll decide, and that's it.
The point is that when you read all of this, it's the perception that you're left with. There are a lot of minutiae, a lot of complex details in figuring all this out.
What is the impression that you're left with?
Martin Sorrell, is he a greedy man? Because that's all that at the end of the day that people take away.
No, it's not. It can't be a question of greed, right? If the question is, Martin Sorrell is a person who invests in the company in which he tries to run, right? Has invested entrepreneurially in the company which started with 2 people in one room 28 years ago to a company now with 160,000 people, 160,000 people in 110 countries. Is that right or wrong? Is that what we want? Do we want to have a world leader in the context of the UK, a global leader, like WPP? Should we have more of them or less of them?
So it's a communications job for...
No, it's not a communications job.
For the board and for your compensation committee?
No, it's not a communications job. It's a question of what people want. In difficult economic times, people look at issues of this nature differently. And do you want to have lowest common denominators or highest common multiples? I mean, I'm not a manager that has come into a company. I'm not a manager who's come in as a turnaround or a turnaround artist. I'm somebody who's started the company with other people, built a company up. And the question is, do we want to have companies like that people invest in? You know, be very fair if, again, all we had was options which we bought and sold, or we triggered when they vested, reloaded, and continually cashed in and cashed out. But what I've consistently done in this case is made an investment in the company. You know, people talk about being an entrepreneurial risk. The translation of that word means risk-taking. That's what it's about.
Sir Martin Sorrell, as usual,
Thank you very much.
A pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
All the best.
Good to see you. Thank you.